Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Augmented Volume 1 launch party. I am your host, Keith Giles. I'm also the editor of the Augmented Volume 1 anthology. As you see here, today is release day. We're already in the top 50 as of this recording. I checked it just before we jumped on. We're number 45 in science fiction short story anthologies, so that's not bad for the first few hours. Hope to see that go up, but we're just excited to have it out there. I'm so honored to not just to be able to talk to each of you about your contributions to this anthology, but quite frankly, just as we had the idea for the anthology, put the word out there, started getting the contributions, and I was really seriously blown away by the quality, the diversity, the creativity. All of you guys, all of their stories were really awesome, so great, and I'm glad they all fit in this in this first anthology. And hopefully, we'll do it again next year. That's the plan. So I want to just talk a little bit about the idea, and then I'd like to go around and I'll call on you guys and just ask you to talk a little bit about, tell us about yourself and about your contribution. Tell us a little bit about your story. If there's a spoiler, don't spoil it, but just give us an idea of what your story is about. In the anthology, I'll say the idea, the reason I wanted to do this anthology. Quire Publishing has been around for about 7 years, and but in January of this year, I, along with my friend and business partner Matthew DiStefano, we became co-owners of Quire Publishing, and so with Quire 2.0, one of the things we wanted to do, or that really I wanted to do, was to position Quire Publishing as a publisher of science fiction. And we already had published a few science fiction authors. Some of them are in this anthology. But I wanted to really focus on that a lot more. So one of the most intentional things that we did was earlier this year, we published a collection of Philip K. Dick short stories called Sci-Fi Lullabies Volume 1. Volume 2 will be out early next year with a foreword by Tessa, by the way, who's with us on this call. And then we also started pursuing authors to write novels. And we thought, what, another great way to find great writers would be to put together an anthology. So we put the word out there. Again, like I said, the contributions we received were really fantastic. I want to thank all of you for contributing excellent work to the anthology. And I guess what I'll do is I'll just start, I'll just pick someone, I'll call your name, and I'd like you to just kind of tell us a bit about yourself and tell us about your story in the anthology. So Chris, I'm going to start with you. Chris McAuley.
Hello.
Hey there, welcome. Tell us a bit about yourself. I know you are, this is not your first rodeo. You've done other things before in this genre.
Yes.
Yeah, so tell us about that.
So yeah, I suppose I'm most known for creating the Stokerverse with Bram Stoker's great grandnephew Decker Stoker. Wow. And we've got novels, audios, games, all sorts of things out in that, and that's really the continuation of the original Bram Stoker's Dracula. So how fitting in Halloween,
Yes, perfect timing. Yes.
I moved into science fiction with Claudia from Babylon 5. So we've created a universe called Dark Legacies, and that's the story that we have in this anthology. We've got a story from the Dark Legacies universe, and there's comics, games, all sorts of things in that as well. Aside from all the stuff I've created, I've worked on the Terminator series, Doctor Who, Star Trek, now Stargate. I think that's all the sort of franchise work I've done as well. So
that's all you've done, really? So oh well, just Terminator, Doctor Who, Star Trek, Stargate. Yeah, just a few things on the side. That's good.
It's been fun. It's been fun. It's been fun, I have to admit. So yeah,
that's great. Well, it helps if you're a fan of those things, right? You kind of get a chance to play with those characters in those worlds.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love the Terminator stuff, and I love going back to sort of the original feel of the Terminator, the techno, the dark side of technology. I'm working on I've worked on a couple of video games, RPGs, some short stories in the Terminator universe, and I'm working on a really secret project at the minute for the Terminator franchise.
Okay.
But I get to retcon an awful lot of stuff in it.
Good.
So that's fun. So I want to bring it back to the sort of the nightmarish vision of this killer that's absolutely relentless
Hmm.
and will not stop until you're dead.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that world. So he's almost like a a cyborg serial killer.
Yeah. Yeah.
The real darkness in there, and a lot of my work is punctuated from darkness. It's from that. So in the anthology, I write a military sci-fi story, which has moments of hope, but it's all about, again, the despair of war. I swear to God, I'm actually quite a cheerful person. I mean, this is, some of the stuff I write is pretty grim, but I'm quite a cheerful, optimistic, hopeful person.
That's good to know.
But I think when we look at the world around us, it's the endless futility of war and what it really is, and shifting, basically national, but it's just shifting of national boundaries all the time, and all of that kind of stuff. Growing up in Northern Ireland in the 80s and the 90s, all we had was war. When I was a kid, I was climbing through bomb craters to get to school. It was a rough, horrible existence in which violence was just commonplace.
Yeah.
So I think that's where this story sort of comes from, that war-torn, what it's like to live in this war-torn city in Mars.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then briefly tell us about the, so you, as you said, in the anthology, we have a snapshot into the Dark Legacies universe. And this is something you've co-created with Claudia Christian, who, by the way, huge fan of her. I love Babylon 5. So it's really cool to have you and her both in this. But talk a little bit about that. What is the Dark Legacies universe? What's that all about?
Yeah, she came to me and she wanted me to write a TV show. And I said, why just do a TV show? Why don't we do, the books and the comics and all, basically the same as what I've created with Stokerverse.
Yeah.
And then we got the entire surviving cast of Babylon 5 involved. So the comics have, we've got Peter Jurczyk, we've got Pat Tallman. We brought in Walter Koenig as well. And there's going to be like a few Star Trek stars as well in the comics. It's great to craft this thing, but essentially what it is that humanity's coming out of this very dystopian sort of totalitarian government, and they're looking towards the stars with a renewed vision of hope. So you see, I do write hopeful things.
Yeah, okay.
So what we're trying to do is go back to the sci-fi feel of the 90s, not so much the dystopian stuff that's kind of in vogue at the minute, because I do find a lot of science fiction quite depressing.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to get sucked up into that. The story I do write in the anthology is actually the before time, so it's a prequel to the main Dark Legacies timeline. But that's the ethos, is that we sort of, why it's called Dark Legacies is that Claudia's character has an investigative role within the military, and she starts to uncover the dark legacies of the previous government and what they've really been up to, all the horrendous things. And she's looking to atone. There's a lot of atonement, concepts of atonement within Dark Legacies. Right. Reconciliation is very important as well, and the theme of Dark Legacies. So it's fairly hopeful.
Yeah, that's really great. Very, very interesting. So it's so great to have you again contribute to this anthology, Chris. And thank you.
Thanks,
and let Claudia know as well that I really much appreciate that.
I will. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Viacheslav, or Slav, as you said I could call you. I know you have a bit of talk a bit about your story, but I know also your personal story as well kind of overlaps a bit with some of the things that Chris was just talking about. So tell us about yourself and where you are, and then about your story.
Okay. My name is Viacheslav, or Slava, if you will. I'm from Ukraine. Previously, I've been published a lot in Russian and Ukrainian languages. They are pretty similar, like Spanish and Portuguese. And starting from, I would say, roughly speaking, 2015 or 2016, I started writing in English without translator's help.
Wow.
I should have said at the beginning that I am not a native speaker. So if you find that I say something weird, feel free to interrupt me and ask a clarifying question, okay?
Okay.
I will only welcome it.
Okay.
So, speaking about my story, it was written back in 2020. To be honest, I don't like to reveal. I just don't know how to speak about my stories because I want people to read them, because not just. And I always find it difficult to describe what I expect readers to think about my story. How can I put this? Okay. The secret behind this story is that many years ago, I came across an interesting story written by one of my favorite writers, Roger Gelesny. And the name of the story is Go Starless in the Night. I did like the idea, but I didn't like how it was articulated and how it ended. So I took the concept and redeveloped it in my fashion. And it ends in a completely different way.
Yeah, very cool. No, it's funny. I've done the same thing. I've read, without getting too specific, but I have read stories or things like that where I thought that's a decent idea, but well, I really don't like the way that was executed. And it inspires you to say like, hey, I think I could do something better with that. So yeah, that's
Indeed.
cool. Yeah. And so you are still, you said this story you wrote in 2020, but you are continuing to write in English and publish stories in English as well, right? You've appeared in other anthologies and magazines, things like this.
In Western market, I was published in Space and Time magazine and also in the Kaleidoscope online zine.
Okay.
And I keep sending submissions to other publishers, magazines, and etc.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, thank you so much for your contribution. I really loved your story. And I guess I should say, full disclosure, I came across the story. I think I found you on, there's a science fiction Facebook group, science fiction writers Facebook group. I think I found you there, and I went to the website.
I apologize for interrupting. I posted the link to my website on that group, and then you came across it.
Yes, and then you had a couple of stories on your website, and I saw this story, and I was like, ooh, I really like that. So I reached out to you, and you were very gracious to allow us to publish it in the anthology, so thank you.
I believe we also have to be grateful to a bunch of beta readers and editors who helped me to polish this story.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's great. Thank you so much. It's good to have you be a part of this call and be a part of the anthology.
Likewise.
Okay, who am I going to throw it to next? I will jump over to Zach. Mr. Cannon, tell us about yourself and about your story, or as much as you care to divulge about your story.
Yeah, sure thing. Probably the most important piece of information right now is that I have a tremendous head and chest cold. So if I cough, I apologize.
Okay.
About me, well, I spend my days working as a pastor and as a fledgling spiritual director. And working through that side of the creative process and helping people explore the divine and explore mystery and engage in life that way. But I've always really enjoyed storytelling. When I was younger, my undergraduate is in film and video production. Studied screenwriting and lived in California for a third of my life at this point before moving back to Virginia. But life does what life does and takes you in different places and different directions. And so I wrote off and on through that and did some comps and festival work, but kids and ministry and all that fun stuff move things in a certain way. So it wasn't until the pandemic that I really started writing again in earnest, because I actually had time to sit down and to craft things and fell back in love with it. And so I've pretty much tried to be as consistent as I can with the writing practice since the pandemic. And this story came out of that, and a short novel came out of that, and hopefully a lot more work comes out of it. and I'm just really excited to access that part of my brain, and then to see how those two things connect. So this story actually started as a short script to make with a student who was going to be graduating during the pandemic. And so all the settings and the characters are based on places we knew we could shoot, and people we thought we could incorporate for free. And then when he moved and a year went by and I was sitting with the story for longer, it continued to evolve until I think I rewrote the last 2 pages in September or late August. So, but it's just been my attempt to translate a couple of people's experience of just how not nihilistic, but the depressive episodes that we all kind of went through, but also with this longing for something new, and what does it look like to explore that. And then I just try to throw as many science fiction tropes that I could into one story.
Right.
So that was pretty much it.
Very cool. Well, I really liked your story a lot. I think if I remember correctly, I think there was, like you said, you kind of rewrote the last part of it in August, which was right before our deadline. So
yeah,
it was like a last minute, like, oh, let me get this in. So
yeah, we got a little bump there at the end, but it all made it into it, and I'm happy with how it turned out. So.
Yeah, same here. It's really good. I mean, I liked the story before, but then you made the changes, and I was like, oh, okay, wow, it's even better. So good job.
I thought so. Thanks.
Andrew, I think I'm going to jump over to you. Andrew, tell us a bit about yourself and about your story, and then I want to say something briefly about your story after you talk. But go ahead.
Okay, sure. Basically, how the story happened was you kind of sent me the message like just at the right time, because I was because I was doing a thing where I was like editing a paper, managing a couple other newspapers and stuff, and that job didn't quite work out because I was starting to work. I have a problem of working way too long hours, so I was starting to work 60, 70 hours. And I was like, okay, I gotta head out, because I had done that before, and it was probably not the best idea. But I think pretty much the month I headed out, you sent me a message saying, hey, there's this science fiction anthology. Do you want to write a story for it? And just some background. I know Keith from something completely disconnected from this.
Yeah.
Basically, it was sort of like a religious deconstruction reconstruction thing, and he runs a thing to sort of help during that period and etc. And so during that, sorry, Keith, I'm talking about you in the third person. Anyway, but during that period, Keith learned I liked science fiction, and I was writing a book, and that was actually kind of tied. Anyway, we won't get into that. Yeah. So then I had this kind of story bouncing around in my head. The plot of the story is that there's someone who runs an automatic ambulance thing. Well, not runs. She works in an automatic ambulance thing, and then this guy hurts his leg, and he has to run away from this ambulance because he can't afford the medical bills, and she needs to catch him because she needs to win a sweepstakes contest. It was just kind of a thing that it's a combination of things. Like one, there was a game I used to play in college called Fugitive, where you run to the object was to get from one point to a house on Edith Street in Missoula, like one point at the University of Montana to a house on Edith Street, and people like chased you with cars, they chased you on foot. Whoa. Stuff like that. Actually, one time I slipped and like knocked a piece of my chin off and had to get stitches and stuff, and probably a concussion. It was a really fun game, though. I'd like to do it again. It was the combination of that and kind of the vibe of Nightcrawler, if you've ever seen that movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. Just the fact of like that movie, just for background, is kind of a guy to kind of succeed in the world. He shoots not he like videotapes horrific crime stuff like that and gives it to news organizations. And as a journalist, that movie was interesting to me. But and then it was just kind of the vibe of that. And of course Blade Runner, the movie Blade Runner, the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I'm kind of getting a little off topic. Okay. And so I kind of wrote that up over a couple months, and I had to actually, weirdly enough, a big part of it is the guy running away from the ambulance wants to be a poet. And oddly enough, poetry has never been my thing. So I had to read several books of poetry and like figure out which poetry would work there. And like, so I had to do like a deep dive into poetry. So I picked like 3 specific poets who I thought would work for what that guy. And so it was kind of a thing you needed to internalize how poetry worked and stuff like that. So that was interesting. But it was really fun to write, put together over a couple months, and there we go.
Yeah, I want to say, so yeah, I had never, I knew you, and I knew you had mentioned when we were part of that group that you were working on a science fiction novel, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see it, you know, but I'd never read anything you've written. I just knew you. And so then I reached out to you, you sent me the short story, and I just thought it was brilliant. It was genius. And what I love about it, though, it is like you said, it's sort of a mixture of like Nightcrawler, maybe a little bit of Clockwork Orange, a little bit of Blade Runner. But there's also some dark humor in there as well. And the pacing of it, you kind of just start it and it feels like a roller coaster. It never lets down. It's kind of relentless. It just, to me, that's the way it read. It was just like relentless. And I really appreciate it too. You were doing something in the story I really like. I really appreciate when science fiction writers and even like film directors will do this kind of a thing where they don't dumb it down and they don't hold your hand and they don't over explain everything to you. It's sort of like, here we go, and try to keep up. Right. And that's what I felt like reading your short story. It was like, you're just in this world. These are the rules. You're taking something that we can all kind of relate to, which is like the high cost of, like the idea of like now, if one of us got sick, unless you have really great insurance, and I don't, if I got sick and I had to go to the hospital, I'm pretty much done for the rest of my life. I will now be in debt forever to the hospital, right, for my hospital bills. And so that's a truth I think a lot of people can relate to, but then you just kind of take it and tweak it a little bit in, a couple of years into the future. And it's become gamified, weaponized, it's reached these kind of absurd levels. I don't know, all of it I just thought was really great, and the writing style was great, and it made me really excited to read your novel. Whenever you finish that, I can't wait to read that.
And one of the things I like to do with the story is I won't go into detail, but there are themes underneath it that you don't have to see. You don't have to see the theme underneath it. You don't have to see all these little things. Like you can just kind of read it on the top, and like I hope you have a good time. But there are also like themes underneath that I thought was fun. But one thing to keep the pacing is I had to cut out a lot of lines that I really liked. Yes. There was one that the most egregious, I'll admit, the most egregious one was the first time I described, well, not the first time, but like when we're getting into a real horror part of horror, quote unquote, I described it, the ambulance involved as an Aeschylus anti-number 9 dream Batmobile perched upon a cyber-synthesis painted array of titanium legs. And then I showed that to my mom, and I was like, and she was like, no. And so I was like, oh, fine. So I took that out. It was a really fun time writing that.
Yeah, it was a blast. Yeah, thank you so much. It was fun to read, and I can't wait for people to read it and hear their reactions to it as well. Great job. Matt Downey. I also I want to have you introduce yourself a little bit, talk about your story, and then I have something I want to say about your story as well.
Okay, a little bit about myself. I'm basically a theologian, so that's what I'm doing in this space. But I've had a lot of different jobs in my life, and some of them have related to the theater and to writing scripts and different things like that. So story is basically the common thread that has tied all of those things. When I do theology, I'm very much focused on narrative and storytelling and the characters, and how making sure that the characters are cohesive when we tell stories about God or the world, or how those interact. And so I've always written stories and loved fiction, and I was looking for hope as well, because I know sci-fi can get a little dark. And even as I was writing my story, I thought, oh my goodness, I got to find a way out of this, because it's just going down and down and down, which is
Yeah,
fine.
it was kind of dark for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought, well, no, just let it, you let the story kind of percolate in your subconscious and let it work that. But anyway, I have a previous book with Choir, which is theology book, talking about the idea of expansiveness and width in how we think about God and the world and ourselves. So this is my second outing with Choir, and I'm very happy to be included in that. I guess I can talk about my story a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Don't give the good stuff away, but you can give us an idea of the universe and what.
Yeah, I
the setting
feel
is
with
and all
some
that.
of the others, like, how much do I say? I can't give too much of it away, because I play with quite a few things. Basically, when I sat down to write the story, it was a Tuesday, and I just wrote, today is Tuesday, and I thought, and then where do we go from there? So I play a little bit with our expectations about what a week looks like, expectations of time. Even play a little bit with the idea of what constitutes a family or a society or gender, and who gets gendered and who doesn't, and who gets to be a character and gets to speak and who doesn't. And the idea of, I think the main thing is, and it's a younger character, is this a general, because they're just born into a world that's all they know. But then you see this gradual awakening to the knowledge that not everything in this society or this ordered world is a good order. And then what to do with that knowledge, I think, is the main thing that the character is faced with. What do I do with the knowledge that the way everything has been normalized around me is not the way that I want to continue living or to follow in those footsteps?
Yeah.
I think I've said enough.
Yeah, that's great. That's good enough. Yeah, you didn't give us very much at all there. But I would just say it's the final story in the anthology. And it was one of the later ones, I think, that we received. And I do know you from Choir. We published your book. And so I really didn't know what to expect. But when I read your story, and you know this because I messaged you almost immediately after I finished reading it. And I said, not only did I love the story, I was kind of begging you to try to write a whole novel in that universe, because after reading that short story, I really want to know more about that universe. I want to know more about that character. I want to know more about what happens after them. I mean, it's so great and it's so beautiful. And it's like, again, it's a short story, but in a short amount of time, you really give us an idea of what this world is like. They're playing by different rules. They have different assumptions about the way things work. And this little child in her innocence, sort of questioning that and saying, why is it this way? And does it have to be this way? And it was just beautiful. I really loved it. And if I could convince you to write a full novel, I would do that. I just think it's so great. I want to hear more.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely thinking about it. I have some other projects I'm completing. Then I think, well, let's go back to that world and see what else will unfold. So yes, thank you for that suggestion. It is in my mind, and I'm letting it
Good.
let
That's
it
good to hear.
develop. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Darrell Epp, my good friend Darrell. Tell us more about yourself and about your story.
Okay, great. My story, I guess, involves an alien encounter, which is something I was kind of interested in because I have some problems with most alien encounter stories. Like, imagine going to a planet and everyone's humanoid and dateable, except the girls have green skin, for example, right? So, in my story, the alien who arrives happens to look just like an angel, and people are tempted to worship him. And the alien's like, no, please don't do that. I'm just some guy. I just want to go home, right?
Yeah.
So I was interested in the idea about, what would an alien encounter really be like? And I think if it happened, it would be incomprehensible. It couldn't have a happy ending. It couldn't have a 3-act structure. It couldn't make sense. So that's kind of what I went for. And I remember when I was a little kid, I read a story by Guy de Maupassant called La Horla, and It's my favorite science fiction story. And H.P. Lovecraft said if it wasn't for La Horla, there would be no Cthulhu. And basically, in this story, a gentleman has an alien move into his house, and this alien is invisible, immaterial, malevolent, and likes to drink milk. So the narrator will come home, his milk is gone, his furniture is rearranged, and eventually he goes insane. And that's it. So what if an alien encounter was like, you know, when you're cutting the grass and you step on a bunch of fire ants and you're the fire ant?
Yeah.
What if it's like that? Also, I really don't like stories that have heroes or good guys or bad guys or salvation or climaxes and happy endings, because I don't think that's what real life is like. So I had this idea in my fiction: picture a summer blockbuster, a thriller, but instead of starring a handsome guy like Tom Cruise, the story's told from the point of view from the guy next door who doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah. Right.
So in my story, like, there is alien contact, but the guy doesn't have the answer. He just tells you what he knows, and that's it, right?
Right.
And I'm kind of more interested in ordinary people than these science fiction tropes. I was just thinking, in the city I live in, there's always been a fair mafia presence. And a few years ago, there was a guy who was murdered because the mafia thought he was someone he wasn't. He just happened to live next door. So imagine if the likelihood of you being killed by the mafia was less if you were actually in the mafia than if you were just a next door neighbor.
Right.
So I thought that was a good idea. So I was just sort of interested about a story that involves something pretty dramatic, but the narrator was like, I'm not a hero. I'll just tell you what I know and leave it with you, you know?
Yes.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
So great. And then I'll give you a little bit of background on Darrell. Darrell is a poet, and he knows it. And he's published, Quire published his most recent anthology, or it's not anthology, a poetry book called Permanent Smoke. It's really fantastic. You should go check it out. It's really, really good. Darrell's definitely one of my favorite poets, and also a good friend. He and I briefly did this thing a couple of years ago called Imaginary Lines, and it was like a little podcast that we did, a kind of YouTube show we did, where we got to sit and talk for a couple of hours about, you know, poetry, sci-fi, movies, comics, and just whatever we wanted to talk about. And it was a blast. And it's still out there on YouTube. If you're curious, go check it out. It was a good show. I just got too busy with other things to keep doing it.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you do have a new poetry book you're working on, right? That hopefully will publish next year.
Yeah, I'm hoping to have it to you by the this is news to both of us. I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but hopefully by the last day of November, I'll have a manuscript for you. And
Great.
I just think, you know, of course, fiction is such a great way to talk about the most important parts of your lives, what you think about life and death and meaning. And it's just like, even if you write a sad story, it's not a sad story because because you wrote a story. You did something that nobody else could do.
Yes.
And you weren't just a spectator your whole life. You actually did something. Because when you write a story, whether it's a masterpiece or not, you did something nobody else can do. So it's a celebration of being alive in that way.
Yes.
And also it's a way to cut through the white noise, where normally in life, when you meet a stranger, a fellow human being, you talk about weather or sports ball or whatever. But if you meet a stranger who also likes Blade Runner or whatever, suddenly you're not strangers. Suddenly you're getting excited because you're talking about some secret pocket of yourself that you can't share with most people, but it's very important to you. So through the power of art, you can have this connection with strangers about the most profound pockets of your existence, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's very cool. Yeah, very
Yeah.
excited to have you a part of it. Thank you for your submission as well to the anthology. Tessa,
Yeah.
I know you've been waiting so long. I appreciate your patience. But Tessa, Dick, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your story.
Okay. Most of you, if not all of you, know that I was married to Philip K. Dick. Sorry, dry throat. I was a writer long before I met him, not a science fiction writer. I sold my first article, a how-to article, when I was 15 years old. So I was into journalism.
Mm-hmm.
But he encouraged me to write fiction. And this story, I don't want to say too much, but I was thinking about the dangers of making machines too intelligent,
Right.
especially when you're using them in modern warfare.
Yes.
And I'm glad to have it in the anthology.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I am too. I'm very, very excited about it. And then I've known you for a little while. So I reached out to you and invited you to submit something. And I was very, very, very hopeful that you would. And when I got your submission, I loved it. And I also don't want to give anything away, but I will try to say it was the kind of thing that I really loved about I mean, the way you approached it, and several people here have, in their short stories have tried to talk about sort of the dangers of technology or artificial intelligence, or have written about sort of the futility of war. And of course, now we're living in even more than when we started the anthology. There's more war going on around the world and in our news feeds than ever before. And so I thought your story was a really creative way of helping us think about those things, and especially the collision of those things, like what if artificial intelligence, and it seems almost inevitable that it will be, is something that kind of gets incorporated into the war machine and the implications of that. And I thought you took it in a very interesting direction. It was certainly a surprise to me where you took it, and I really, really liked that. So thank you so much for that story.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, very cool. So
And
we don't really, sorry, go ahead.
it was fun to write. I had fun writing it.
Yes, yes.
Actually, writing is grinding labor, but I really loved that story, but I keep thinking I ought to edit it and make it better.
Yeah, that's the problem. You can just keep going and going and going, right?
Yeah, but if you edit too much, you ruin it.
Right. Yeah. It's that little sweet spot you got to hit. Well, I really love it. I think it's a great story. And thank you all for being so gracious with your time. Thank you for your submissions. Again, the book is Augmented Volume 1. Volume 2 will be out next year. But the first one is available now. It's available on Amazon. It's on Kindle, and it's on paperback. Great, great stories. In addition to all of these great authors and stories, many, many other great stories available as well. And go check it out. Thank you all for for being a part of it. I look forward to reading more of your work, whether that's published somewhere else or with us. But yeah, love your work. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for being with us here today on this call.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, mate.
Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure.